That was the flight of a Chinese stealth fighter. China has now unveiled 2 prototypes for its 6th generation fighter. It's the first country in the world to do so. The United States, France, Germany, and the UK only have such designs on paper. Military experts believe that whoever gets the 6th generation fighter first will dominate the airspace battle.
But I'm reading other commentary on this, and they said, "Well, this is a Sputnik moment for U.S. It's the Sputnik moment happened is not because U.S. lacks a technical capability, because nobody felt there was a need to invest in space program. But when the Soviet first did the first launch the Sputnik, that light a fire under American butt, and that America then decided to devote resources to the space program to beat the Soviets. So U.S. were able to be the first to land a person on the moon. So they're saying this is going to be a Sputnik moment for the U.S. defense industry, because now, with all the focus on China, this is going to justify whatever gazillion number of dollars going to be poured into the 6th generation fighter program. That's going to propel America to another 60 years of air dominance. What do you say to that?
Yeah, so like this might have been the case if this was America of the 60s and 70s. But unfortunately for America, I think people are more into copium these days than to actually doing things. So I think also the other things to consider is China's moving at a really high cadence. When I say cadence, I'm just talking about like this, the speed at which we go from one generation to the next. So they basically took about 13 to 14 years to go from J10 to J20, and they're taking about another 14 years between J20 and J36 and this new Shenyang project, right? And it's very important to think that if China's moving like at this pace, like America is just, it's very hard to see how America can move at this pace, this China pace that we're talking about here. And at, at one point, America probably was innovating and putting new aircraft out at like every 15 years and such. But we're at a point now where the aircraft technology and the electronics technology are so advanced that it just takes a long time to develop and test all these aircraft. When the F-15 project was developed, right? It took after they decided on the program, it only took maybe 3 years for them to fly the first one, and then the flight testing was only like 4 years back then. So, but we're not at that age anymore because, as I was talking about, with all the capabilities that you're adding into the J36, especially with the electronic warfare and with the all the higher power generation and leading a whole bunch of drones, basically adding as a command and control aircraft from the front, it takes a long time to test these things. So even though I I see J36 itself as a further along project than J20 when I first flew, I still anticipate that the testing period and to be as long, because just the fact there's so much stuff to test. And if you just look at the the J15D and J16D electronic warfare programs, it took them a long time to get those aircraft after they first flew into service, because you have to make sure that the aircraft can jam, can confuse not only land-based radars, they can confuse the airborne radars and the naval radars. They all operate on different frequencies, right? So there's a lot of things to actually test again. You want to be able to also jam satellites communications, right? So in the future, when you have an electronic what I call integrated electronic warfare system between you and the drones, um, you have to send a consistent picture to the other side of what an incorrect view of the battlefield looks like for them. So everything, you have to know where all the opposing assets are, and you have to send them incorrect information so that they think that there are these like more aircraft than there are in the air. So all this stuff takes a long time to actually develop and test. It's not something where you can just first fly an aircraft and expect it to be in service in 3 years. It just doesn't work that way. I mean, even the F-35 Block 4 program that doesn't require a new aircraft. It's basically just upgrading its electronic side of things from electronic warfare and radar and things like that. Even that one's taking like 7 or 8 years to complete. Like it's not expected to uh, go into service 2032. And people think the sixth generation program is going to fly and get into service before then. That's just crazy. They don't even think about these things.
Yeah, I mean, traditionally, it's a Chinese way of doing things. By the time they're ready to debut a aircraft, that means they have a fairly confident of the success because this time China didn't just fly doing some day maiden flight at night, like the NGAD program. China, they made sure to flew their new aircraft over residential apartment building, so everyone saw it. Everyone could take pictures and videos from all different angles. They really wanted to showcase this aircraft, and I think that shows a degree of confidence, in their new platform. So I'm 100% with you here, but I'm just bringing out some of the copium so you can respond to. So thank you for that. Anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, so I think obviously with the J20 project, it was shown that like this is pretty much just how they release new products. You know, the Chengdu Aircraft Corporation, they're close enough to the city vicinity that once this thing starts flying, you can't really hide it. So unless you just want to keep arresting people and putting them to jail for releasing photos, it's better to do like a control release of the photos and videos and things like that. And that's what they're doing here. And more importantly, like I just think that if you have something that can fly, that you're confident about flying, that you know it's not going to fall off the sky, it's better to let the world know and don't make your aircraft too visible to people, but let them know generally that it's flying and they can figure it out for themselves just how hard it is to deal with, and then it gives your leadership significant leverage in negotiations and things like that. So one of the things I pointed out to in my Substack is like this thing's gonna have like 3,000 kilometer range. And what this means is, once this thing is in service and there's like nothing within a half a generation of it, it's going to be able to dominate the skies up to 3,000 kilometers away from the Chinese border. And you've seen recently the freak out from the Indian media. Like it's kind of interesting because the Indian media is really freaking out now, but the American media is kind of trying to pretend that it's not happening, except for the military buffs. But the reason why the Indian media needs to be worried about this is now they could have an aircraft that can fly over all of India undetected and just destroy whatever China wants to destroy, and that is a huge security threat clearly for India. But if you look at 3,000 kilometers as away from China, that includes all of Japan, all of Korea, all of Philippines, all of Southeast Asia. It extends all the way to Iraq. That's how far you can dominate the air. It extends much of Indian Ocean, not Indian Bay of Bengal, which is the sea between India and Myanmar, and it extends to like basically all the way to Indonesia, and it covers Guam and things like that. And when you have an air dominance fighter that can provide air coverage that far out, then you can also you, when you pair that up with a huge navy that you have, that means you can actually have your aircraft carrier groups operate much further out than they are now. And so my thinking is that like you could have your aircraft carrier operate at least 3,000 kilometers comfortably away from your uh, away from China, and that means then you can have tankers that can refuel your J-36 or AWACS or whatever from that far out, and they can go even further. And like obviously, when we're talking about like range and things like that, the further that you can go, the more that you can control over the air, and the better. So one of the common cases that people talk about is how in the West Pacific combat, two of the things American people talk about when it comes to America is, one, they're going to base their cornerstone strategy around Guam because it's like around 3,000 kilometers from China, and they thought up to this point that if they get NGAD into service as 3,000 kilometer range or 2,500 kilometer range, and China doesn't have something like that, then they can use electronic warfare to defend against China's ballistic missiles, and then they can come and bomb those things. But now, if you have like a Chinese aircraft that's going into service 6 or 7 years before that, that can come and just destroy Guam, then that option goes away. And the other option that they thought about is having B-21s that fly from like Australia or Alaska, from like 3 to 4,000, 4,000 kilometers away over, and that they can weaken the Chinese air defense a little bit before other aircraft comes in, and to make it easier for the aircraft carriers to get a little closer to China. But if you have a situation where the J-36 can fly pretty far into Russia over Russian airspace with the Russian government's approval and stuff like that, and then if you can get that refueled over the Russian airspace, then you can easily fly into Alaska and just drop bombs into Alaskan air bases that could be fielding B-21s. And then with this kind of setup, basically you're pretty much uh, taking out the two primary source of avenues where people are thinking that they can weaken Chinese control of this nearby waters. And same with Australia. So this is actually, I think, a big moment for a lot of countries nearby China when this thing goes into service, and they have to acknowledge its presence. Because like, how do you can pretend that it doesn't exist, right? But how do you like when it's test flying, whatever? But how do you pretend that it doesn't exist when it's flying, it's controlling a bunch of drones, and your country's within its range?
Can always target airfields, right? I mean, airplane might move, but airfields not moving. I mean, I assume this is why U.S. is moving Typhoon missiles into places like Philippines. They're moving all these medium range ballistic missiles closer and closer to China so they can cover a wide area inside China. But I want you to take a crystal ball, look into your crystal ball for a second. Now, we know the US sixth generation fighter program, NGAD, has been in a limbo, basically got sent back to the drawing board. But now with the China's new launch of its own aircraft, would this, with given all the China hysteria in US, in the Congress, among the political elite, how fees how likely is it that now tons of money and resources going to be devoted into sixth generation program and totally re-energize it? I mean, maybe not like rush it out, be able to rush out before Ch- the Chinese plane into service, but what's the likelihood that this is going to be a sort of Sputnik moment?
Yeah, I think there might be a Sputnik moment when it comes to U.S. funding. Now, if we remember correctly, the NGAP project basically got put on limbo because they did not expect, one, they did not expect a Chinese project to come out like this, and two, the nuclear renewal program was sucking up all the budget. So it will be kind of interesting to see what happens here. So there's two school of thoughts here. The one school of thought, which was I think prevalent before J-36 program came out, was they were going to go for a less capable manned piloted aircraft for NGAD that will rely more on the CCA, so the collaborative combat aircraft or drones, and it was going to have more like something like F-35 type of range, and rather than what the J-36 has, and it was just going to be a lot smaller and cheaper to build, so they can field in a much larger number. But I think it's kind of pointless to, in my opinion at least, you know, that's one option. That's what the U.S. Navy was planning, was the FAXX, and then there's a there's a people in the Air Force who wants to have, like, obviously the more air dominant aircraft that's, symbolizes American power, for example, right? Um, but in this case, once Jersey 36 comes out, and it's obviously humongous, and it has three engines, it has a lot of internal fuel payload, and what people don't realize is that something like J36 could have maybe 10 to 15x the power requirement of something like F-35. Even the latest, even the Block 4 F-35 is going to have, it's like a different magnitude in terms of the power generation. And when you have that much power generation, you need a lot of additional power from the engines, and a lot of jet fuel to generate that electricity, right? So you need a very large aircraft for this, and the only way to do that, in my opinion at least, is to have a really large aircraft from on the American side that also uses three engines. I mean, you can use two really large engines, but I think it's bad for maintenance point of view, and they would have to restart the engine development program if they wanted to create extra large engines for that. So when you have a three engine design, they're gonna have to go back to the drawing board to figure out how they can develop something that has even longer range than 3,000 kilometer, that can have even higher power than the J36, and you know, and that and there's like a very tight development window compared to what they've been doing with with F-35. It's I really don't even know how this is gonna play out. When I gave people when I gave the timeline of 2037, 2038, for like something that's probably better than what the J36 is now, I think I was giving a very optimistic point of view. It could be a lot longer than that. So just because, not because America can't do it, but just how much time it would take to, redesign, like reissue new RFPs for like a large aircraft, and then go through the entire test program for it.
You mentioned engine. That this is the one area where China traditionally have been lagging behind. The J20 initially they use Russian engine. Now they just recently been replaced by China domestically produced WS engines. Now, what is do you think the Chinese engine now is up to par for the sixth generation aircraft, or that's still in the pipeline?
Yeah, so I think it's very important to consider a few things, like the Chinese aero engine industry is actually moving fairly fast at the moment. If you look at the amount of engines that military engines that they produce, um, the Chinese military engine production might be the highest in the world, just based on the number of aircraft that they produce every year, right? So there's a lot of money going into it. They really built a domestic supply chain, and they got the cost down, and the performance is pretty decent. So that's one of the things they're able to do for J36 that they weren't able to do is J20, is using a very viable domestic engine product right from the start. So what we see in there is probably like an upgraded version compared to what J20 is currently using in production. Now, uh, we do expect within the next few years, WS15 to be flying around with J20As, right? Like we already see them, J20A, J20S, they both use WS15 when they're flying, you know. Um, but for like obviously a new aircraft like J36, you want to first fly it using a more mature engine, so you're not testing both the engine and the aircraft at the same time. So I do expect later on in the test cycle they're going to replace that with WS15, and again that's why you need the 7-year cycle, because you want to eventually, when this thing goes into service, it should be using three WS15s. Three WS15, the main improvement is that you can then just use the what we call the dry thrust, um, to fly your aircraft supersonically. So dry thrust without afterburners. With the it uses much less fuel than the engine that uses afterburners. So one of the main attributes with supersonic cruise is that you can go like a lot further, a lot faster without using up all your internal fuel. So in terms of that, I do expect WS-15 to be in service by the time that J-36 go into service, and then ultimately you want to move toward a system of engines that, like at least a new engine that is beyond WS-15, and we consider that to be like the next generation engine. Now, how that will work with J36 in the future, we don't know yet, but I would assume it's something that's a lot more integrated with your electrical system, so that when they are able to develop this new engine, that it will be able to support even greater power generation within the aircraft. And I think that's probably, if we think of 2031 to 2032 as the likely point when J36 goes into service, you probably want the next generation engine equipped version to go into service closer to 2038, 2039 range. So that's kind of the timeline we're looking at. Generally speaking, if it's 14 years between generations for China, it's probably 6 to 7 years to the first major upgrade.